What's the true measure of success? For Elon Musk, worth over $200 billion, that question arrived with a plate of cold eggs and a waitress who was about to change everything. The January rain painted Seattle's streets in reflections, transforming puddles into mirrors of neon signs and brake lights. Outside Murphy's diner, a man in tattered clothes hunched against the weather, his beard matted and gray, his hands raw from cold. No one would have guessed those hands had once signed SpaceX contracts worth billions, and now lay unconscious on the dine. Elon Musk adjusted the prosthetic beard that had taken his makeup artist 3 hours to apply. The silicone additions to his nose and cheeks itched, but they'd transformed him from the world's richest man into someone society usually tried not to see. His clothes, carefully distressed by his team, carried the authentic musty scent of a homeless shelter, where they'd been aged for weeks. A team of consultants had spent days ensuring every detail was perfect, down to the subtle wear patterns on his shoes. The diner's neon sign buzzed overhead, open 24 hours. Through the foggy windows, Musk could see the midnight rush in full swing. Truckers nursing coffees, young couples sharing fries, the night shift heading to or from their grinding reality. The scene reminded him of his own early days in Canada, when a hot meal was a luxury and success felt like a distant dream. Remember, his assistant's voice crackled through the nearly invisible earpiece. You have the panic button if anything goes wrong. Security's across the street, and, sir, the documentary crew is in position. Musk touched his pocket where the button lay unused. This wasn't another PR stunt or social experiment for content. This was personal, triggered by something his son had said at breakfast 3 days ago. Dad, do you even remember what it's like to be normal? The question had haunted him, forcing him to confront the growing disconnect between his reality and the world most people inhabited. The bell above the door chimed as he pushed inside. The warmth hit him first, then the smell. Coffee, grease, and something else. Hope? Desperation? In places like this, the two often danced together. The linoleum floor bore scuff marks from thousands of shoes, each representing a story, a struggle, a life trying to stay afloat in a world that seemed increasingly designed for the wealthy. Sarah Martinez had been waiting tables at Murphy's for 6 years. Her feet ached, her tips barely covered her mother's medications, and Table 7 still hadn't touched their waters. She didn't need another homeless person nursing a coffee for hours at her best booth. But something in the way this man moved caught her attention. His hesitation seemed studied, almost rehearsed. Andrew Bells. There was a consciousness to his shambling that felt out of place, like an actor who'd learned his lines but hadn't lived the part. Just one? She asked, grabbing a sticky menu. The lamination was peeling at the corners, the prices crossed out and rewritten so many times they told their own story of inflation and struggling margins. Musk nodded, his prosthetic beard catching the fluorescent light. He'd practiced this moment, rehearsed the slight tremor in his hands, the downcast eyes, the shuffle of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of being instantly dismissed, categorized, and filed away as someone not worth truly seeing. He felt hopeful, even celebrated by all these cause to be worried about, and that things could be more peaceful now. Sarah led him to booth 13, the one with the broken vinyl seat that hissed when you sat down. As she placed the menu before him, she noticed his hands. They were dirty, yes, but the nails were perfectly maintained. A small detail, but in her 6 years of serving Seattle's forgotten souls, she'd learned to notice the things that didn't fit. The homeless men who came through her section had hands ground down by life itself, cracked, calloused, with dirt ground so deep it became part of their skin. Coffee to start? She asked, pen hovering over her pad. Behind her, the cook called out an order, his voice mixing with the clatter of plates and the murmur of late-night conversations. And eggs, he mumbled, his voice rough with practiced despair. If they're not too expensive. The words felt hollow in his mouth, a pale imitation of real need. He thought of the billions in his accounts, the houses, the cars, the casual way he could buy companies on Twitter. What did he really know about expense? Sarah's pen paused. Something in his voice. An accent, maybe? It nagged at her memory like a song she couldn't quite place. She'd seen his face on 100 customers, but his eyes, they held none of the vacant desperation she was used to seeing. Instead, they sparkled with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. They were the eyes of someone used to being heard, to commanding rooms, to changing worlds. "Eggs are $4.99, she said, watching his reaction carefully. "Coffee's free refills." He fumbled with his pocket, producing crumpled bills that looked authentically worn, but smelled surprisingly fresh. Sarah's suspicion deepened. In the kitchen window behind him, she caught a glimpse of movement outside, a black SUV pulling up across the street, its windows tinted beyond legal limits. As she walked to the kitchen, her mind raced. The hands, the accent, the SUV, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't asked to solve. But Sarah Martinez hadn't survived 6 years of graveyard shifts by ignoring her instincts. She'd served everyone from tech bros to politicians in disguise, each thinking they were pulling off their little charades. But this felt different, bigger. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that her next decision would spark a chain of events that would make headlines across the globe and force one of the world's most powerful men to confront truths he'd been running from for years. She nodded slowly. The eggs would get cold, but the truth was about to get very, very hot. Sarah's steps toward the kitchen slowed as her mind processed the inconsistencies. The way he sat, shoulders naturally squared despite his attempt to slouch, reminded her of her former corporate customers, the ones who treated Murphy's as their guilty pleasure after closing million-dollar deals. His hands told one story, but his eyes screamed another. "Order in!" she called through the kitchen window, watching as Miguel, their night cook, grabbed a fresh plate. The fluorescent lights caught the graying streaks in his hair, earned from 20 years of graveyard shifts. "Hey, Miguel." She lowered her voice. "Notice anything weird about booth 13? Miguel glanced past her, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. "Apart from the fact that his homeless jacket probably cost more than my monthly rent," he cracked 2 eggs onto the griddle with practiced precision. "Yeah, something's off. The SUV outside, too. Saw 3 guys in suits trying real hard to look casual." In booth 13, Musk fought the urge to check his phone. The prosthetics were starting to itch unbearably, and the earpiece crackled with his security team's increasingly nervous chatter. "Sir, the waitress is suspicious. Should we abort?" He touched his coffee cup. 1 tap for no, 2 for yes, their predetermined signal. 1 tap. He hadn't come this far to back out now. The conversation with his son replayed in his mind, driving him forward. "You don't understand what it's like anymore," XAEA12 had said over their breakfast of custom-made organic smoothies. "You talk about helping people, but when was the last time you actually sat with someone who's struggling? Someone who can't afford to buy Twitter for fun?" Eyeing my tray of foods in the restaurant, I asked. The words had stung more than he'd expected. He had grown up with determination, not privilege. He'd showered at a YMCA once, lived on $1 a day, but somewhere between PayPal and Tesla, between millions and billions, had he lost touch with that reality? It was the first time in his life he really felt this way. Sarah returned with his eggs, setting the plate down with deliberate care. Instead of walking away, she slid into the seat across from him. The vinyl creaked under her weight, and the sound seemed to freeze the air between them. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table, "want to tell me what a billionaire's doing in my section at midnight, pretending to be homeless?" Musk's hand instinctively moved toward the panic button. But something in Sarah's expression made him stop. There was no malice there. no excitement at the prospect of exposing him. Instead, he saw genuine curiosity mixed with... Was that disappointment? "How did you know?" he asked, his practiced, rough voice slipping back into its natural cadence. Sarah's laugh was soft but sharp. "Please. I serve actual homeless people every night. They don't smell like designer distressing. Plus, your hands. They're workers' hands that have never worked." She leaned forward slightly. "But mostly, it's the way you keep glancing at that SUV outside like it's your safety blanket." Through his earpiece, his security team was having a collective meltdown. "Sir, we need to extract you now. This could be a security risk." But Musk found himself more intrigued than concerned. For the first time in years, someone was talking to him not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, not as a meme lord, but as a human being, and calling him out on his pretense. "Would you believe I'm doing research?" he offered, watching her reaction carefully. Research. Sarah rolled the word around like she was tasting something bitter. Into what? How the other half lives. Poverty tourism for the ultra-rich? From the kitchen, Miguel watched the scene unfold, his spatula hovering over the griddle. 2 other servers had stopped their side work, sensing the tension building in booth 13. Outside, the men in the SUV shifted uncomfortably, one speaking rapidly into his collar. "Actually," Musk said, straightening slightly, his disguise suddenly feeling as transparent as it truly was, "I'm trying to understand something my son said. About connection, about reality." He sat down across from Ross and frowned at the barricade. "Reality?" Sarah's eyes flicked to the window where the rain continued to fall on people who couldn't afford to play act at being poor. "You want reality? Let me show you something." She reached into her apron and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. As she smoothed it on the table, Musk recognized it as a medical bill. The numbers at the bottom made even him, a man who casually tossed billions around on social media, pause. "This is my mom's monthly treatment cost," Sarah said quietly. "I serve eggs and coffee for 16 hours a day, and it still barely covers half of this. That's reality." The paper between them became more than just a bill. It was a bridge between 2 worlds that rarely intersected with genuine understanding. And as Musk stared at those numbers, at the weight they carried in this waitress's life, he felt something shift in his perspective. But what happened next would change not just his view of reality, but of himself. Through the diner's windows, camera flashes began to pop like lightning, and Sarah's simple medical bill was about to ignite a storm that neither of them saw coming. "They need to get moving." The camera flashes outside Murphy's diner multiplied like fractals, each one drawing more attention. Someone had recognized Musk, despite the disguise, and now social media was doing what it did best, turning a private moment into a public spectacle. But what happened next would shock even the most seasoned paparazzi. Musk reached up and began peeling away the prosthetic beard, his movements deliberate and calm despite his security team's frantic voices in his ear. "Sir, we need to move now." He ignored them, his eyes fixed on Sarah's medical bill. $8,342.17, he read aloud, his natural voice now fully present. "Every month?" Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of the growing crowd outside, but choosing to focus on the surreal conversation happening in her booth. "Cancer doesn't care about overtime or tips," she said softly. "Mom worked here for 20 years before me. Now I work here, trying to keep her alive." Musk pulled out his phone, not the burner phone part of his disguise, but his actual device. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Tell me about your mother," he said, still typing. "Why? So you can what? Tweet about meeting real people? Post about how you learned some valuable lesson about privilege?" The bitterness in Sarah's voice carried the weight of countless empty promises from powerful people passing through her section. He resisted the urge to turn her around, instead carrying her back to the cell. But Musk wasn't typing a tweet. He turned the phone around, showing her the screen. It was a wire transfer page, and the number made Sarah's coffee-stained notepad fall from her suddenly limp fingers. "That's," she started. "But 5 years of treatments," Musk finished, "plus a trust for future medical expenses." His finger hovered over the confirm button. "But there's a condition." Outside, the crowd had grown, phones pressed against Murphy's windows, recording every moment. The night shift workers, the truckers, even Miguel in the kitchen. Everyone held their breath, watching history being written in a booth with broken vinyl. "Bronchitis," Murphy said. "What condition?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't let me make this about me," Musk said, surprising everyone, including his security team. "This can't be another billionaire throws money at a problem story. Your mother's situation isn't unique. The system that put you both here needs to change." He stood up, his disguise now half removed, creating an almost mythical image, half homeless man, half tech titan. "I came here trying to understand reality, but you showed me something more important. The gap between my world and yours isn't about money, it's about perspective." "Huh?" Sarah's eyes moved from the phone to his face and back. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to hire you," Musk announced, his voice carrying to the now silent diner, not as a publicity stunt, but as head of a new division at Tesla. Healthcare innovation and accessibility. Full funding, full autonomy, because who better to fix a broken system than someone who's been crushed by it? The crowd outside erupted in cheers, but Sarah didn't move. "You don't even know if I'm qualified," Musk smiled, tapping his phone screen. The transfer completed with a soft ping. "You survived 6 years working graveyard shifts while navigating our healthcare system and keeping your humanity intact. That's more qualification than half my executive board." He paused, looking around the diner. "Besides, I've a feeling your real education happened right here, in booth 13. As if on cue, Miguel emerged from the kitchen, carrying a fresh plate of eggs. "On the house," he said, grinning. "Though I guess you can afford it now, Sarah." The next morning, headlines would scream about Elon Musk's undercover adventure. Social media would explode with hot takes and viral clips. But they'd all miss the real story, how a billionaire walked into a diner looking for a reality check and found something more valuable instead. A reminder that true innovation doesn't come from pretending to understand struggle, but from empowering those who've lived it. Sarah Martinez's first act as head of healthcare innovation wasn't to hold a press conference or write a mission statement. Instead, she hung her last order pad in her new office, right next to her mother's first all-clear scan. And on her desk, in a frame that caught the morning light just right, sat a single photograph. Booth 13 at Murphy's Diner, where one plate of cold eggs changed everything. The billionaire may have gone undercover, but it was the waitress who ended up uncovering the truth. As sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments of genuine connection. And sometimes, just sometimes, those moments happen over eggs in a 24-hour diner, served with a side of reality that no disguise can fake.